coming to you from New York City. I have a very special guest joining me today. Wherever you are from around the world, you're going to be excited about this conversation because we are talking about the intersection of culture, academia, and everything in between with this next guest. He is a prolific author. Of course, he's gone on to do academic work as a scholar at the University of Michigan, and so much more. We're going to be unpacking all of that and so much more. So all you have to do is just sit back, relax, and let's enjoy the next couple of minutes together with myself and the one and only Dr. Marcus Collins, everybody. Woo woo.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for having me here.
How are you doing?
I am all smiles. I'm very grateful.
That's what I love to hear. That's what I absolutely love to hear. And right here on the show, when we open it up, we love finding out where our guests are, their time zone, and what part of the world that they are located at this very moment.
Okay. I am currently in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is about 45 minutes southwest of Detroit. We are at Eastern Standard time zone, and the vibes are high over here.
That's good. That's absolutely good. So we have audience from all over the world that join us. And as I said in the intro, and this conversation really kind of brings together the intersection of culture, academia, and really the in-betweens. And we're going to be looking at culture from a very different landscape today. So I'm hoping that you are ready for that, and our audience at home have their notebooks and their pens to get a lesson in the kind of the idea of culture, as we're going to be also unpacking your book that thoroughly explains this concept. But let's take it back to Detroit, right, Michigan, and what was your culture growing up? What did culture look like? What was your experiences growing up? And what did you understand culture to be as a young boy growing up?
You know, I didn't have great language to describe culture growing up, and I probably wouldn't even have used that language to describe what my experience was. But looking back now and having the lexicon that I do now, I would say that, you know, I existed in many cultures. My family was very much church going, so that was very much a part of my existence. It was a part of the way I see the world, and very much a part of the way I navigated the world. I grew up a big hip hop fan. So that was another sort of part of my intersectionality. I grew up a musician, and so I played in bands, I sang in choirs, I sang in groups. So like that was very much a part of what I was. And I'm very much a product of the city of Detroit. That in and of itself has its own set of conventions and expectations of what it means to be a Detroiter, whether it's the artifacts that we've done, the language that was normative for people like us, and the behaviors. It felt like the convergence of all those different monikers sort of made up who I am, and definitely who I was.
Yeah. And what would you say were some of the things that informed your understanding of the world at that time, right? You mentioned church, you mentioned music, you mentioned art, which to some degree kind of shape how we think and see the world. But for you, what would you say were some of the things that you took and you identified as being markers of culture for you as a young boy?
Yeah, church, 1000%. Like church was and is in very, very many ways the frames by which I made meaning of the world, the way by which I sort of guided morality, what I thought was morally upright. When I think about the aesthetic in which I gravitated towards, it was that of hip hop culture, full stop. Like I grew up on 90s hip hop, like Tribe Called Quest, De La Soul, NWA, right? Even on the opposite side of that, while also not being in college, but still being inspired by the HBCU historical Black college and university aesthetic of the time. I think like Martin Show and Living Color, Def Comedy Jam, Martin Lawrence, of course, Martin Show, Cosby Show, like all that cultural production was very much a part of my growing up. I mean, like movies like Boys in the Hood, Menace to Society. I mean, these things really shaped and reflected what I thought was expected and acceptable for people like me. At the same token, I also grew up really deep on Boys to Men, very much grown up on Take Six and Jodeci. So while, you know, I feel like there was a rough exterior as a byproduct of hip hop culture, deep on the inside, I was just a marshmallow. I was an R&B guy through and through. So I think that, you know, these different parts of me, these different hyphens that made up my personhood, in some ways they were in concert, in other ways they were in conflict. One was hard, one was soft, one was emotional, one was one was sort of stoic in the way in which it presented itself. One was celestial, one, you know, divine, while the other one was very material. I think that I sort of oscillated across those spectrums as I navigated life. You know, I grew up in Detroit, the blackest city in the country. You know, my existence was black. Everything was seen through a black lens. But I grew up swimming competitively. So like while my friends were on basketball teams and baseball teams or football teams, I was on the swim team. And you know, I swam with the team in Detroit, which was all black. And then I also swam with a state team that was all white. And my brother and I were the only black people on those teams. So I felt like my life very much existed in what was seen like a binary: hard, soft, divine, material, black, and white.
Yeah. And I think this is definitely helping us as an audience understand the framework in which you identified culture as growing up, because I think a lot of how we grow up, a lot of how we are raised, a lot of how we see the world in that time of our season of our lives really informs and helps us paint a picture of the world as we grow, right? So I'm happy to see all the colors and see all the movies you were watching and the music you were listening to, because now I have a little bit of an understanding of your culture as well, to some degree. Would you want to
And I
add
think
to
that
that?
that's actually, yeah, I think that's actually a really powerful thing you just said. You know, what you observed is my cultural production, right? Which is the collection of shared work among a group of people who subscribe to the same community or the same culture. And that shared work is a reflection or expression of the way they see the world. And what we do is that, you know, we learn about people through their production. We learn about people through the way in which they express themselves: music, film, television, pottery, podcasts, poetry, dance, all these things, that brands and branded products, they become ways by which we peacock ourselves to the world. And back then, I didn't have the language to describe it, but today, as a cultural scholar, you know, it's very clear. You know, I think about culture through a sociological lens. A gentleman by the name of Emil Durkheim, one of the founding fathers of sociology, would refer to culture as a system of conventions and expectations that demarcate who we are and govern what people like us do. It's a system by which our personhood is carved out in the socially phenomenal world in which we live. And with that, our association of expectations and acceptable behaviors of people like us, right? Depending on how we self identify and all its intersectionality and all its many monikers and all of its many hyphens, right? Individual reference: I'm a professor. Group reference: I'm in a fraternity called Phi Beta Sigma. Abstract reference: I'm a father of two little girls. Right? Those things together make up who I am, and because of who I am, I see the world the way I do. Right? That's why for some a cow is leather, for others it's a deity, and for some it's dinner. Which one is it? It's all those things, depending on who you are. For some, a rug is decor, and others it's a souvenir, and for some it's a place of worship. Which one is it? It's all those things depending on who you are. Because of who we are, we see the world a certain way, then we navigate life a certain way through the artifacts that we don, the behaviors that are normative, and the language that we use. And then we express ourselves through shared work. So when you say, oh, I get a better understanding of who you are, Marcus, because of the music you listen to, the movies you watch, the things you engage yourself in, that gives me a better understanding of who you are, because those activities and that production, that media, those are expressions or outward expressions of inward beliefs. And as we get a sense of our outward expressions, we get a proxy of our inward beliefs. And our inward beliefs and our identity are the anchor to our cultural subscription.
Would you say that culture is performative to some degree, right? If with what you're saying, with the balance of the inward expressions kind of coming then out, is there performance to it, or what would you say to that?
I say that our practice is performative. The practice of culture is performative. So culture is just the system. The manner in which we engage in it and practice it is a performance. There was a sociologist named Irving Goffman, and in the 1950s, he had this breakthrough idea, which essentially was an analogy, a metaphor, where he equated social life to theater, borrowing from the quote from William Shakespeare that all the world is a stage, and we are men and women are merely actors. Right? We know our exits and our entrances. And Guffman used that metaphor to say the social world in which we live, we decide what character we're going to play. We decide, I'm going to be this character. And because we decide on the character to play, we then don the costumery, the artifacts. We don the behaviors, right? The mannerisms. We accept and learn the script, that is the language. Right. And then we play on the stage of the social world based on the character that we choose. And Guffman would go on to say is that be careful about the mask that you choose, because before long, your mask becomes your face.
Oh my God, this is so good. This is so good. This is absolutely good. And I have a question for you, right? So as a South African, so I'm a South African, recently came to New York, and my cultural identity had already been prescribed to me even before I could decide, right?
Yeah.
And pick a stage and pick a language and pick. But because my parents are from a tribe called isiXhosa, right? And that then is my culture. Even before I decide what music I like, even before I decide what food I like, or any of the things that would kind of fall under the cultural preferences.
Yeah.
But just by being born from these two individuals who are Xhosa, and then anything that falls under that being the costumes that we wear, the food that we eat, and the language that we speak.
That's right.
But it's also, to some degree, I find it kind of a conflict to say, I didn't decide that I want to be in this culture.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, so what you are hitting on is a very important distinction. The difference between being ascribed and subscribing, right? To ascribe, for something to be ascribed to you, that's when you have no volition. It just is. Like, I am a Collins because I was born from Herschel and Jeanette Collins, right? And I grew up in the church because Herschel and Jeanette Collins were a part of the church, right? There's a sociologist named Althusser, and he says that, we are interpolated, right? Interpolated is to be sort of raised or reared into what would be acceptable or expected citizens in society. It's interesting when you think of the word culture. The etymology of culture comes from to cultivate. That is to harness, to grow, to tend to, like someone cultivating grains, which is why we call it agriculture, right? We cultivate grains in hopes that our crops will have uniformity. The same thing goes, we think about children. We acculturate children to have uniformity in the kind of citizens we'd have in our society. So when you grow up, your parents poured into you what was for them acceptable and expected of good standing members in their community. Now, what happens is that once you come of age and you have more agency, you then decide what you will subscribe to, even though things have been ascribed to you. So here in the States, what happens is that, people, a great majority of teenagers will graduate from high school and go to college, at which point they come to school and they meet all these people from different walks of life and different cultural subscription. They go, wow, I never heard that before. I never seen that before. I never experienced that before. Wow, 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 wow. And in doing so, they start to create new frames of reality. And as a result, their beliefs and ideologies shift. And in some ways, their identities shift. And then they go home for Thanksgiving with their parents, their family, and they go, "Oh man, I don't see the world the way y'all do no more." And they go, and they feel like, "Oh, like now I have to sort of decompartmentalize a part of my identity or shift away totally." And what you find is people come of age, they'll say, "Hey, when I go home, I go there for a night, and I gotta get out of there because I'm no longer like them." And you find new community. And I like that metaphor of college because it really is a metaphor of sort of social living, in that when we as a species were coming about, we were always meant to live in small groups, in tribes, in small hamlets. It wasn't until the Industrial Revolution that we started to descend in these big cities for work. And we go to these big cities to go make money for our families. And I bump into people and I hear things I never heard before, saw things I never saw before. And then my identity begins to shift. And it's through consumption that I find ways to create uniformity or congruence between what I do and who I am. So that's a long way of saying that we are ascribed certain cultural characteristics that our family give us, and then we subscribe our identity to said culture with volition once we have the agency to do so.
Wow. I'm sure your students have a great wealth of knowledge. If they get to hear this on an average, I'm sure they are very privileged students to be learning all of this from you. But also when we think of culture, we can't separate culture from community, right? What's your take on the importance of either being part or joining a community, or creating a community in order to be able to create the subscription of this culture that makes sense to you?
Sure. Well, I would say that culture is the sort of the glue of the community. It's the covalent bonds of the community. It's the operating system, the governing operating system, such that I know what to expect of people in the community, and therefore there's trust. Like if I know what to expect of you, then I therefore trust you. In fact, I love this construct for trust. It's defined. It says, trust is the mechanism that absorbs uncertainty. And I just love that. It's the mechanism that observes that I don't know what is going to happen, or I don't know what she might do. Trust absorbs that. You go, I don't know what's going to happen, but it's going to be all good because I trust them. When people are like us, they are of our culture, we know, oh, because we have the same beliefs, the same behaviors, the same artifacts, the same language, the same expressions, that person are more likely to act like me than not. And therefore, I trust. So culture, it plays such a major part in our community. So communities are the collection, the collection of people, and culture is the covalent bonds that connects those people. Right? They are the governing operating system by which we act accordingly, such that we maintain good standing citizenship within the community and also foster trust through the expected outcomes of people inside of it.
Yes, yes. And it's a terminology that we get to hear, at least from the outside world coming in the US framework, that says the culture. And when one kind of thinks about the culture, there's certain types of festivals that you think about. You think of Essence Festival, you think of
Yeah.
Revolt Summit, you think you think of Thanksgiving, you think of there's just these various holidays and various kind of signifiers and moments in the year. And when you say things like the culture, as an outside world, we see it from an African American kind of point of view.
Yeah.
What is a correlation within that? Is the culture the expression of African Americanism, or how would you kind of explain that for the world who is outside of the borders of the USA?
It's a bit metacognitive. In fact, that's why I named my book For the Culture for that very reason. So the phrase for the culture popularized by a gentleman named Sean Carter, that we also know as Jay-Z, on a song called Izzo. He says, I do this for my culture. And that language, like all cultural production, that is a reflection of the people, became reworked into our zeitgeist to become a part of the lexicon, a part of the language of people like us do. So that language was created from the diaspora in the vehicle that is Jay Z, and then became adopted into the zeitgeist and to the lexicons of black black Americans, right? So we say for the culture, we're doing it for the culture. I'm doing it for the culture. It essentially is a shorthand for I'm doing it for us, right? So I'm creating this music for us. I'm making this tweet for us. Right? I'm talking like this for us. I'm out here doing my thing for us. It's very much us being sort of a wide net of the African diaspora represented as Black Americans here. But the truth of the matter is, from a scholarly perspective, we all do it for the culture, for our own bespoke culture, whether it's the predominant African American culture, whether it's Black Greek letter organizations, that culture, HBCU culture, Black church culture, whether it's cosplayers or marathon runners or anime or gamers or whatever. Like there's so many cultures. And to your earlier question, this performative nature of it all is like we are all performing for the culture. We're all performing in our cultural subscription through our cultural practice. So while that language is very much Black, it is very much us, the diaspora, the African diaspora, as represented through Black culture, the scholarly, literal language means that it's actually all of us do it.
Yeah, and then we kind of make sense of it in wherever we are around the world, and it's but
That's right.
ultimately it's for us. That's what
Exactly. And I,
that.
and I think it's worthwhile noting that, here in America, you know, uh, I think I don't think it's bold to say, but I think it's worth saying that the uh, the dominant sort of popular culture here in the country is a derivative or reworking of Black culture. Full stop. And the literature backs this up in that, you know, typically marginalized groups of people, marginalized societies, underappreciated, underestimated societies in culture or in the world tend to be the most creative because they have less. They have less resources. They have less access. They have less capital. Therefore, they have to be more creative to subvert, to rework, to refashion, to regroom what they have. So they take language and subvert it. They take aesthetics and rework it. They take what is plain, like Adidas shell toe sneakers, and they put fat laces in them and they unlace them, right? And they wear it with track suits and they give it a certain sheen to it that give it new meaning, right? And that becomes the aesthetic of the popular culture. That becomes the language of the popular culture. I mean, here in the States, if you look at like the most popular slang in the country comes from the LGBTQ plus community, particularly Black, gay, queer, and trans community. And why is that? Because they are the most marginalized groups of people in this country. And things like, yes, slay, work, he ate, like all that comes from all that comes from the Black queer community, right? And we rework it into the popular zeitgeist. So, when we say, again, another Jay-Z quotes that, everything moves because of us. I mean, by that, it's like everything in the popular culture moves because of the Black cultural production. Because we are the most creative, innovative uh, innovators on this country or in this country because we have less access. We are most underestimated, underappreciated, and therefore we have to rework the little that we have, and it's always dope. That's right. That's right. It's us. It's us. I mean, and it should be like we're saying that if you look from a global aspect, what continent has been most underrepresented, despite how fly it is, despite how amazing it is, right? It's the African continent. And from a music perspective, here in the country, the the most popular sonic silhouette in the culture is Afro beats. To no surprise.
Put in the Amapiano as well because it's where I'm from, so I'm a bit biased here.
Yeah.
So Afrobeats and Amapiano being, as you're saying, like it's becoming a big global phenomenon right now, and in and of itself, really has become a culture, right? It's become a culture that people from the continent have said that we are prescribed to this Amapiano movement, and how then does the rest of the world get to understand a different culture from another part of the world and fit into it or subscribe to it?
Yeah.
What are some of
So
the things I think that needs to be looked at in that?
so from a scholarly perspective, we would say that is cultural appropriation. And when we hear that, immediately we go on alert, go, whoa, 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 isn't cultural appropriation bad? Well, scholarly speaking, there are different forms of cultural appropriation. If we look at what does appropriation mean, to make something appropriate, it is to transfer one thing to the next thing, right? The appropriations that so that I am appropriate here, I am transferring the way I show up for this particular thing. So cultural appropriation is when the cultural markers of a different group of people are transferred over to make appropriate, to make sort of contextual. So, for instance, there is an occult, and this is all about power, by the way. This is all about power. So, there is a form of cultural appropriation where there is cultural transference, and that's from two different communities that have similar power. For instance, in the United States here, you got black and brown people, particularly Puerto Ricans and black people of the African diaspora from Jamaica and everywhere who are here in the South Bronx. They exchange their cultural markers, and together we get hip hop, right? That kind of transference is like, oh, these are two groups from equal power. That kind of appropriation isn't considered, a negative thing. Just like black artists here in the country leverage the cultural production of the continent to that we call Afro beats, and the many ways we express that. And we go, that's cool because we are of the same community and at the same levels of power in society. But then there's this notion of a sort of transculturation, which is when we have a melting pot of things, right? Where we call it in the United States supposed to be the melting pot. These different cultures all together, we all sort of learn from each other. We all kind of engage in each other's culture, i.e., I'll have Greek food on Monday, Italian on Tuesday, Wednesday, Japanese, Thursday, Indian, and Friday, whatever, right? So like injera, right? I'll have some Ethiopian food. So like the idea there is that we're all just exchanging, right? That transculturation is just all about a big mixing pot. We all sort of experience each other's. The other one is a cultural dominance. The third one's a cultural dominance, where it's like a culturation that I come to this country and I want to fit in, and therefore I learn the mannerisms, the language, the behaviors, the artifacts of the dominant culture. Here in the States, that hegemony is whiteness. Therefore, we try to assimilate to what is considered smart through that lens, what is considered beautiful through that lens, and so on and so on and so on. That is a dominant culturation. Now, the fourth form of cultural appropriation, that's the one that gives us all pause, and it should. And that's a cultural exploitation. That's when we take the cultural markers of another community and we rob it of all its meaning and assign new meaning to it. When we do that, we essentially obliterate the existence of the original creators and we assign it new meaning as if we Christopher Columbus the thing. An example I always go to is VMAs, the MTV Video Music Awards. Kim Kardashian is wearing cornrows, and someone goes, Kim, oh my goodness, your hair is so amazing. What is that? And she goes, they're Bo Derek braids. You go, no, they're cornrows of the African diaspora. What are you talking about? By her giving it a new name, she robbed it of all its meaning. She essentially uh, erased us, and our people, the creators of this cultural expression. So to get to your question, when we see things like Afro beats began to uh, propagate across the globe, the question becomes: is this a cultural appreciation or is this cultural exploitation? Cultural appreciation is when we go, who are the makers of this? I don't know where this come from. What is the origins of these things? And in doing so, we pay honor, we pay homage, we pay respect to the creators. But when we go, this was cool, let's just use it, that leads you in a place of exploitation, right? Coachella, which you probably know, is one of the big music festivals here in California. And a few years back, there were reports of like young white kids wearing headdresses, Native American headdresses at Coachella because it looked cool. It looked bohemian. It looked bohemian chic. That is exploitive AF. You are using the cultural markers of a group of people and reworking them to give them meaning, essentially erasing what it meant to those people. Because if you knew how sacred those headdresses were, how sacred those artifacts were, you would never, ever, ever wear them in that way. So that's a long way of saying the idea of culture being shared, I think, is the heart of culture, but it has to be respected. It has to be appreciated, not exploited.
Not exploited. I think it is a very informative way of answering that question, and kind of gives a lot of insights to how we can find ourselves from a global landscape, kind of be in congruency to understanding each other's cultures. And I want to kind of touch base on this before we move on to the exciting form of literature that you'd put out into the world. But what I wanted to kind of touch base on was your thoughts and your kind of your 2 cents, if I may put it that way, on a recent star who is from South Africa called Tyler. Has been in the news quite recently on because of her identifying from a cultural point of view in South Africa as a colored woman. Different meaning here in the US. How do we make sure that we exchange culture, but in a very kind of respectful way, in an informative way, in a way that respects both sides, but doesn't take away from both sides? Because now the debate has been, this is who I am, but also this is who we are. So how do we come to a consensus in that regard?
I think this is a classic case of cultural incongruence. Tyla was of color. If we didn't know she was South African, we say she's black. No, she's black. And without knowing her origins, we assign the label that she's black, and therefore we expect of her to adhere to the conventions and expectations of blackness, right? We don't call ourselves colored, black or African American, right? And if someone black says that they're colored, you go, what are you doing? We don't call each other that. This ain't the 60s. What are you talking about? Um, but without having an understanding of her culture, we then assign assumptions to her that are not real. And this is like the beauty of like the work that I do, and why I think it's important. I think it's important that the world that we inhabit is not objective; it's subjective. Things aren't the way they are the way that we are. Again, is it cow leather? Is it a deity? Is it dinner? Yes, yes, and yes. Is all those things, right? Depending on who you are and how you see the world, which means that your truth is just as valid as my truth, right? And so long as your truth doesn't mean my oppression, or your truth doesn't mean my marginalization, your truth is just as valid. It's just as rock solid, which actually leads to better outcomes. Because if we have plurality and our perspectives, then we get a wider, more vivid view of the world and all its rich tapestries. So when we see someone like Tyler and she says, and then we go, so you black, right? She goes, well, no, I'm colored. And we go, what? You colored? What you mean, girl? What you talk like that? She go, well, I'm South African. We should stop and go, oh, wait a minute. So how do you guys self-identify South Africa? And as she says, well, we self-identify as colored. We go, oh, wow. Oh, that's interesting. And we actually learned something as opposed to saying, nah, girl, you wrong. You America now, Jack. You do blah, blah, blah. It's ridiculous. It's truly ridiculous. And, I think that she is so guarded about how she identifies now. I mean, she was on the Breakfast Club with Charlemagne a week or so ago. She's so guarded about it because I think that, we have done so much gatekeeping on what it means to be us. And we don't give ourselves the grace to have as much plurality as we have. I often say, I grew up in the D, of course, listen to hip hop, also listen to R&B, but I sang gospel and I played jazz and I love the Monkees as much as I love the Tribe Called Quest. These things make up how I see the world and therefore I navigate the world accordingly. And I think that the gatekeeping on what is black, like what does it mean to be us? What does it mean to be of the African diaspora? I think that for far too long, we have been assigned as a monolith, been viewed as a monolith, but we've given so much license, so much possibility to white people to be all the many ways that white people can be. And they go, friends, we should be doing the same thing to ourselves and for ourselves because we are rich in our tapestry, not just here in the United States, but we start thinking about the diaspora across the entire globe. Come on, y'all. Like, come on. What are we doing here?
So much to us, and
Yes.
I love that we are taking it from a global landscape as well, because it helps for anyone who's anyway that they can also find within themselves and be comfortable with that identity and that culture that they've subscribed to or even are ascribed to that they're part of.
That's right. And I think that, travel does such a good job at doing that. When you travel, you just realize how small your world is, how big the world is, and how small your world is. Right. And when you go and travel, I mean, just by its very nature, because we are social animals by nature, in most cases, we assimilate, we acculturate to the dominant culture. We go, oh, you take your shoes off when you come in the store. Okay, so I'll do that. Oh, you bow when you do this. Oh, you wash your hands when you do this. We do those things because we want to be good standing citizens where we are. We want to fit in. Now, I remember going to South Africa. What was this? This was back in 2007. I spent 2 weeks in South Africa, and it was amazing. I was in Joburg first, which I absolutely love. We did Soweto, we did Kruger National Park, of course, the safari, and then we did the last week in Cape Town. I really wanted to go to Durban. Oh, nice, nice. I want to go to Durban so badly. But what I thought was so cool is that being on the continent, I felt like I felt whole, even though there were so many cultural practices that I didn't know, that I never experienced, and there were so many people who looked like me but didn't look like me, and I just felt like I felt I didn't as an American, as a Black American, you feel sort of like an orphan in that our documented history essentially starts with the enslavement of our ancestors, our documented history, knowing that we come from long lines of our ancestors, of course, but like those connections aren't very material. They're not very salient, right? Because of the barbaric nature that was slavery. But going to the continent and experiencing the continent, I just felt so I felt so human, and I felt so connected. And I think that, and I say all that to say, travel does that to us, that we see how small our existence is and the grain of sand that we are on the beach that is global living. And then when we do that, we feel an obligation to be more social, to be more human. I think it's a really powerful thing.
Yeah, yeah. And I think even one could even say there's a global culture, right? There's a culture that globally we can have our individual kind of country-based, city-based, community-based cultures. But there's something about traveling that exposes you to the global culture and the kind of some of the global norms, that then really connects us as people and helps us understand people and so much more better.
That's right.
And be more empathetic and be more understanding and be more sincere to how we approach things. So I'm so glad that we were able to touch base on that as well, so that everyone who's anywhere in the world could also kind of tap into identifying what we're conversing about today.
Indeed.
Now, you for 3 years you kind of was sitting on this as I said this art form of literature. And I say literally, art form because what I love about literature is that it transcends time, that a book will be in existence forever and ever, right? And it'll kind of be part of knowledge for that time and that season of humanity. And you did that in a beautiful way through your book. And I want us to really touch base on that today. And what was going on in your mind? Where were you when you were putting this book together, when writing this book? Some of the things that were running in your mind, what were those?
I had just finished my doctoral dissertation studying how brands and branded products spread in cultural communities. I was the chief strategy officer at Wieden Kennedy. This is one of the most celebrated advertising agencies on the planet, responsible for Nike's Just Do It. Not me, but the agency was.
Yes.
And I'm teaching full time at the University of Michigan in the Ross School of Business as a marketing professor. So these things were happening. Like all these things, these three massive things were sort of places were kind of spinning as my dissertation was finishing. And I embarked on this thing. I'm going to write this book because I felt like in my industry, marketing, and my culture, the predominant Black culture, in society writ large, we often use the word culture in our daily discourse. Let's get our ideas out in the culture. What's happening in culture? I'm doing it for the culture. Culture. All this talk about culture. Let's get our ideas out in the world. What's happening in culture? We need to tap into culture. All these things about culture. But if you ask 5 people to define culture, you get 55 different answers, and that's a problem. Because if we can't define things concretely, how do we ever fully harness its power? And culture is unbelievably powerful because there is no external force more influential to human behavior than culture, full stop. Which said to me that we need a better Rosetta Stone, a better way by which we can describe it and ultimately use it, apply it to our work for anyone with the best interest in getting people to move. So the idea of the book was meant to do that. Let's provide a language, the Rosetta Stone to talk about culture. And then how do we use it? Leveraging, a century's worth of research, leveraging my many years in the world of marketing communications, leveraging my work as a scholar and people who are way smarter than me, to put these ideas together that are both digestible and applicable.
And who do you say is a perfect reader, if there's even such a term, for the book? If you were to kind of create this avatar of someone who would be the perfect ideal person that you were writing this book to, because you would probably think of an individual when writing it. So who is that person and what do they look like?
I'd say this book is for people who are trying to get people to move, to get people to buy, to get people to vote, to get people to download, to get people to subscribe, to get people to join, to get people to donate, to get people to volunteer, to get people to adopt. If you are in the business of behavioral adoption, whether you're a marketer, a manager, entrepreneur, a politician, an activist, we're all trying to get people to move. But those who understand that this is what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to get people to adopt behavior, this book is for you. It's the cheat code to behavioral adoption.
I love that. Cheat code to behavioral adoption. And I'm going to advocate very much so as we kind of round up this conversation. I'm going to advocate for everyone who is watching to go ahead and buy this book. Again, the title of the book is called For the Culture: The Power Behind What We Ask, What We Do, and Who We Want to Be. And I think that in itself, as a title, already explains to us so much that we can anticipate to receive from the book. So you've told us who it's for. You've told us what the book is about. Now, where do we get the book? And again, as I said, we have some global audiences. So is it available in other parts of the world as well?
Absolutely, yes. It's available in other parts of the world. It's translated in 3 different languages at this point. You can get it from wherever books are sold, but the fail-safe is the Amazons of the world.
Yes.
And the Barnes and Noble. Amazon, the Barnes and Nobles of the world.
And I think there's so much proof in the pudding, right? Not only in what it is that you've said today, but also in what you've written in the book. But we've, someone that is very much identifiable in any part of the world is who you've worked with as a digital strategist for Beyonce, right? You were able to create a community, a culture that is now what has transcended to being a movement under the Beehive kind of trajectory. So share with us how creating that culture was as part of the pudding of what is in the proof of this book.
Well, I'll actually say it was actually my failure in trying to create an online fan club for her that really was one of the biggest learnings of my career, that you don't build community, you facilitate it. At the time, I was running digital strategy for her. This is in the I Am Sasha Fierce days. And a part of my job was moving her offline fan club online, right? Taking her offline fan club and moving them in the online space. And this is at a time of Facebook is on the rise. Twitter is, it is sort of coming to bear. And I thought this would be super easy. Great. Just create a Facebook page, get all the things happening, and people want to show up. Boom, presto. And the team was so overzealous about our ability to do this, call it hubris, that we called the fan club the Beyontourage, which is a terrible name. But we launched this thing, and essentially it was a party that no one showed up to relative to her celebrity. Launched this thing, and it's not happening. It's not really happening. So the team starts to explore across the web, like what's going on? What why aren't people talking? What are people talking about? And in the recess of the internet, we found this community called, they called themselves the Beehive. They had their own language. They had their own artifacts. They had their own behaviors. And they weren't just fans of Beyonce, but they used Beyonce's music as cultural production, as expressions of their shared belief. Beyonce believes in women's empowerment, right? She's always believed in women's empowerment, from Can You Pay My Bills, to the left, I'm a survivor, you ain't gonna break my soul, right? Everything Beyonce's been about has been about women's empowerment. And these people felt the exact same way. They believed what Beyonce believed, and her music was a way by which they expressed their cultural subscription. So the team cut bait on the Beyontourage nonsense and adopt the Beehive as the official fan club of Beyonce. And that's been the case since. So I didn't build anything. I think what I built or tried to build was a failure. Right. But what we realized is that you facilitate community by finding people who believe what you believe and using your resources to help them come together, to help them do things that they are that they have an affinity for, by removing points of friction that stand in their way.
And would you say Beyonce, being an individual as a person, right? What then when the cultural productions, which is the music, the brands that come out of from her, as well as the clothing, etc., her being a person and the brand Beyonce being an entity to some degree, what do people connect to the most from a cultural point of view, or from a community and connectivity point of view?
Yeah, they connect to shared beliefs. They connect to shared ideology. Beyonce represents something. We talk about brands. Brands are identifiable signifiers that conjure up thoughts and feelings in our hearts and minds relative to a company, a person, an entity, a product, an institution, an organization. Right. So Beyonce as an individual, it represents something. She stands in for something. Right. She signifies something. And what she signifies conjures up thoughts and feelings in our hearts and minds, right? Just like Nike stands in or represents athleticism, right? Beyonce represents women's empowerment. And what's a powerful thing to know about this, the neuroscientists are telling us that the same part of the brain that's activated when we engage with the brands we feel most connected to, the same part of the brain that's activated when we engage in religious experiences. That's how powerful this is, right? And interestingly, fittingly, apropos, that those early scholars in sociology, Durkheim, Weber, and Marx, they observed religion as a way to study culture. So this idea of being connected to something, which religion, the etymology of religion means to bind to, that we practice our culture religiously. We are bound to it. We are committed to it. And what anchors culture? Identity and beliefs.
Yeah. And we are, the word bound, I can know that a lot of Beehive fans, wherever she's performing, in whatever country, whatever corner of the world, they will book their tickets and go watch Beyonce, right? Because they're religiously supportive and religiously a part of that community. So you really unpacked this so beautifully for us today. We're running out of time, and I think we should do a part 2 of this conversation, Dr. Collins.
Let's do it.
So that, because there's so much on the table for us to unpack. But again, I want to encourage everyone who's watching to, in the meantime and between time, before we have this part 2, go ahead and get this book so that you can also be part of the conversation, right? Make sure to go ahead, and I'm going to say the name one more time. We will be leaving the description below a link to where you can go about and buy this book, but it's titled For the Culture, The Power Behind What We Ask, What We Do, and Who We Want to Be, by the one and only Dr. Marcus Collins. Doctor, any last words before we say goodbye?
I hope that the book does its job in helping you see the world differently. Because if we see the world differently, then the world manifests differently, and we then navigate the world differently. So that's the hope for all of us.
Yeah, most definitely. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for spending the afternoon with me right here on the Vuyo show. I hope you enjoyed yourself as much as I did enjoy listening to you and having a conversation with you.
I had a blast. I need to get some notes from you, so next time I go to South Africa, I know what to do.
Oh, I got you. Tell me where all the good spots are, because there are some hidden ones that need someone who's been around there to share. So I got you in that regards.
Those are the
Thank
vibes.
You so much. Those are the vibes. Thank you so much, Doctor. And to you at home, thank you so much for tuning in. Of course, this is the Vuyo show. I'm coming to you from New York City, and of course, Dr. Marcus Collins joined us from Detroit. We had an incredible time, and we're hoping that you at home took your notebooks and your pens and learned a thing or two about culture, because that was at the core of what we're understanding here today. He'll be back for a part 2. We do promise you that. So make sure that you come back and join us again for that. But for me and the incredible, insightful, and informative